Well, good evening, everyone. It's really good to see you. My name is Nigel Matthews and I work for the National Park Authority. It's my great privilege to welcome you to this webinar. I hope you really enjoy it. I hope you find it really useful. We've got what I hope will be an interesting lineup for you. I've got a few things to say by way of introduction. I'll hand over after a while to a colleague to just talk you through any sort of housekeeping and how you can use the chat function. We've got 4 people from parish councils who've each got something to say to you. I want to look ahead to how we can grow the New Forest Ambassadors scheme. We've got a slot for one of my colleagues to share with you the results of the questionnaire that we sent out to you, and most important, in if you like, the second half of this session this evening, we have Lindsay Stride with us, who I'll introduce you to later, but she's a commoner, local resident, and she's going to share with us some of the wealth of her knowledge about the New Forest and the animals that she has, and the way in which that shapes the New Forest as a very, very special place. Coming back to now and some of the things that I wanted to say, at the very outset a big thank you to you. If you can remember back to May, those sunny days in the middle of summer when the days were long and the travel restrictions were lifted all of a sudden, and lots of people visited the New Forest, some of them for the first time, in fact many of them for the first time. Many of the others, of course, were very local people who were able to get out into the forest to enjoy it for the first time in some months. I remember going out and finding that there were people who, almost literally had been locked up in their homes and were just benefiting very greatly from the time outside. That health and well-being that comes from spending time with nature out in the woods and the heathland of the New Forest. And of course, the sad thing was, at the same time as all those people coming out and enjoying it, there were inevitably impacts on the forest, one of which was the amount of litter that was left behind. And I remember discussions with parish councils about all of the people who were already out there doing something to help. We discovered that there were new litter picking groups set up, and it was just obvious that there should be some way in which we could engage with those wonderful people and help them to help the forest. So long story short, we eventually decided we needed to order the makings for 500 litter picking kits. So 500 litter pickers, lots of bags, the instructions, and so on. And we set about that. We set about finding 7 venues spread across the New Forest, and some kind of a supply chain to get from these sort of masses of bits and pieces that were at the town hall in Lymington. Rangers there sat all socially distanced, but putting these kits together, bagging them up, getting them out to those venues, and for people like yourselves to then collect them and just to sign up to join the New Forest Ambassadors group. So that's the sort of look back, and since then we know that there have been literally thousands of litter picking sessions that you folks have engaged in, and loads and loads and loads of litter picked up, and the forest is, to be honest, looking a whole lot cleaner than it would be without your help. You've also helped with reporting problems through our report a problem page on the National Park Authority website. That's been extremely helpful. You've shared the New Forest Code, those vital instructions to people as to how they can enjoy the forest without harming it, and you've been supplying counts of cars that have parked outside of car parks when the car parks were full, and that's going to help us in the long run to better manage car parking, which we know that we need to do. So that's my sort of introduction. As I say, is a big thank and a bit of a reflection on some of the things you've been doing. I'll hand over to Jim briefly to give us any sort of housekeeping and rules of engagement, if you like, before I then introduce the speakers from the local councils. Jim.
Hello everybody, my name's Jim Mitchell. Very quickly from me, I'm on the chat, so I don't need to say much to you now except to say please place your questions and I'll do my best to answer them, and of course I can relay back to the people we have here. So any questions, any observations or any ideas at all that you have, please put them on the chat. There may be a slight delay because I get to see them first and then I publish them, but of course if you have some answers to other people's questions, please pitch them in too. So that's probably enough from me, and I look forward to chatting with you on the chat. Thank you.
So thanks, Jim. We have four, albeit one of them is a virtual person today. We've recorded the message. We have four people each from the four segments of the New Forest. So we divide all the councils up. There are 37 parish councils in total. So we have a northwest, a southwest, a northeast and a southeast quadrant, and we have the lead councillors from each of those quadrants with us this evening, who are each going to sort of pass the baton on from each other, starting with Linda Palmer.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Nigel. Good evening, everyone. As Nigel said, my name's Linda Palmer, and as a parish councillor for White Parish, I'm here representing the Northwest Quadrant. John Sanger, who is the official National Park member for the Northwest Quadrant, is unable to be with us tonight, so you've got me instead. I would say that the Northwest Quadrant is the most beautiful, but I'm sure that my three colleagues will each tell you that their quadrant is also the most beautiful, so I'll leave you to decide that for yourself. But all of the parish councils are so impressed and so incredibly grateful for your efforts during a summer which had record numbers of visitors, and many of those visitors were here for the first time and have perhaps had less understanding of how to behave in such a beautiful place as this. In these strangest of times, it's reassuring to know how many of us care so deeply about the forest, and that we're prepared to give up our time to help keep it looking beautiful and as nature intended. So I want to say thank you to all of you, our New Forest ambassadors, for all of your effort during the summer. Thank you very much. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Stephen Tarling from Tiptoe in Sway Parish, here at the end of a damp piece of string in terms of the internet, so if it disappears you'll know what's happened. I'm the Southwest Quadrant rep on the New Forest National Park Authority. The Southwest Quadrant probably wouldn't argue with Linda about the beauty, but we're the most populous, the busiest and the most intensely visited quadrant. And it's partly from an idea by Councillor John Wingham from Brockenhurst that this collaborative ambassador scheme was started by the NFMPA. So the Southwest Quadrant of 10 parishes and town councils who are wholly or partly inside the national park schedule quarterly meetings for local councillors and the NFMPA management. And if anybody in the quadrant or wider wants to contact me, please do so via the NFMPA. The ambassador scheme is envisaged as a collaborative volunteering body supporting the New Forest, where scheme members have great flexibility to do what they want wherever they want inside the national park. We'll be looking to expand the scheme, so any further ideas would be appreciated. You've already had a hint to look at the chat and send us some messages there. And of course, without members, it wouldn't be much of a scheme. So I must thank you all for what you're doing to help maintain the New Forest National Park that we all really appreciate and enjoy. And if I can just one aside, my best moment as an ambassador was round Hatchet Pond on one of the hottest days in the summer, when there were a lot of children in the pond, and I went round litter picking and I quietly mentioned to parents that they really needed to check their kids carefully for the blood-sucking medicinal leeches when the kids came out of the water, and make sure they remove those cleanly. I came back picking litter the other way, and 10-15 minutes later there were no kids playing in the water at all. And on that line, I will pass on to my diametrically opposite geographically, but not in any other way, quadrant colleague Richard.
Hi there, thanks very much indeed for that, Stephen. My name's Richard Taylor. I'm the North East Quadrant parish member at the National Park Authority, and I'm a Minstead parish councillor. Just to give you an idea of the area that we cover, it's Minstead, Bramshaw, Netley Marsh, Copythorne, Ashurst, Wellow, Landford, Melchett Park and Plateford, and Totton, believe it or not. So we're a quadrant that goes from the heart of the forest right out towards the edge of Totton as well. I don't want to repeat what others have said. Well, in fact, no, I do want to repeat what other people have said, and I would reinforce their message. In this exceptional year, it's been wonderful that so many people could volunteer to keep the forest working and to keep the forest beautiful. And to add something from my own personal point of view, I think we have to remember in this difficult year how many people have benefited from being able to use the forest for quiet recreation, and how much stress and mental health problems that has helped to alleviate. And I think the New Forest as a whole deserves a pat on the back for the job that it's done for the much wider nation. So I'll finish that with a huge thank you to all the ambassadors, and pass over to a recording of my colleague George Bisson.
Yes, good evening. I'm George Bisson, Lyndhurst Parish Councillor and Quadrant Leader for the South East Quadrant. It's good to have so many of you joining us on this webinar this evening, and we are really appreciative of what you've been doing in the forest, picking up the litter, reporting inappropriate parking, and helping to keep our forest pristine. I would like to stress that it's very important, even if you only do a little, that you do it often, because by visiting the same place we can pick up valuable data about the amount of litter being left and the amount of inappropriate parking. In the South East Quadrant, we do have a large area which is the waterside, which doesn't come in forest quite so much, but we still have Hatchet Pond, which is a very sensitive area, which I'm sure you've all heard a lot about recently. We've got an interesting programme for you tonight. I hope that you'll be able to take part and learn something. And once again, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Great, so well done, and thanks to each of those four quadrant leads. Just before I hand over to my colleague Richard Austin to give you the feedback from the survey, a couple of thoughts for you. So it's great that you can contribute to asking for questions for this evening. The kind of things we're also quite interested in, either as suggestions while we're here together this evening, or maybe by email if you prefer, is what more would you like to do or to learn about, to join in on as the months and hopefully the years go by and this ambassador scheme develops. So would you like more webinars like this, and if so, are there particular topics you're interested in? Could we lay on some guided walks on particular topics in different places? Would you like to help with citizen science type projects where you're sending your sightings about a particular theme? Are you interested in wildlife gardening, maybe special events with local producers? The list is probably endless. And if you do have ideas that you'd like to send through in the chat or by other means, we'd be really very interested to hear from you. So I think next up is Richard to give us a bit of a a summary of the data that he's got from you folk who kindly responded to the questionnaire that was sent out. Over to you, Richard.
Hello, hi there, good evening. Thanks, Nigel. I am the volunteer coordinator for the National Park, and I've been helping with the coordination of the scheme. And I'm here with you tonight to share the results of our survey. So I'll try and share my screen now with you. Okay. I'm now looking through the results of the questions that you all answered. So thank you very much for answering the questions. The first question was about where did you collect your litter picking kit? So as you can see from the results there, most of you collected yours from Brockenhurst, Lyndhurst and Lymington. And these results are probably to be expected really, as those are the busiest places of the forest, more central locations. And many of you also collected yours at Wood Green and Bewley as well. So as we expect, really quite an even spread throughout the forest. And thank you for all of you for helping out with the scheme and collecting your kits. The next question was about how did you find out about the scheme? So here I've collected most of the responses, and the ones that you can see largest on your screen are the ones that had the most answers. So as you can see, a lot of people used Facebook and Twitter, a lot of social media to hear the news, as well as email and newsletters, other online venues, as well as Lymington Times was another advert we put in. So a wide range of places where people found out about the scheme. The following question is about, were you picking litter before this scheme began? And 70% of you were picking litter. So there was already quite an active group of you already picking litter before the scheme began. And as I move on to the next question, a lot of you named the New Forest Litter Pickers as the group that you're going out with already. I had a few other names like Waterside Wombles, Forestry England as well was a popular answer. Many different groups across the forest go out and pick litter. So there is a list on our website of these groups, which I recommend you have a look at. But at the moment, through our sort of COVID guidelines, it's good to go out on your own and pick litter in a safe way. The following question is, how many occasions have you been out picking litter in the New Forest? So this question obviously is accurate at the time of answering. So I imagine that a lot of you have been out since answering the survey. But at the time of answering, a lot of you have only been out 2 or 3 or 4 times. But as the surveys continue to collect data, more of you have been going out more often and are more receiving answers of 10, 12, 15, 20 times of going out. So that's fantastic. And thank you again for your commitment to the scheme. The following question is about where you've been litter picking. So again, we've got some familiar names here in terms of the busiest car parks, like Barmer Lawn and Hatchet Pond. A lot of you going to those kind of more popular areas. Other names that stand out are Pigbush, Whitemoor Pond, Milliford Bridge, and a lot of these locations are quite central in the New Forest. Also, what's missing on this word count here is a lot of the villages around New Forest, so Lyndhurst, Ashurst, Brockenhurst, a lot of you going around the villages as well. So I thought it best to kind of show these answers as a word form at the moment, but I will be mapping these answers as well. So if you think there are any answers there that are missing, or have you been litter picking in new places, please let us know and we can update the data and show you in a map form quite soon. The next question was about what have you been collecting out there in the forest? So a lot of you, as you can see, have been collecting cans and plastic bottles and plastic wrappers. Again, also quite high on the list are crisp packets, glass bottles and disposable cups. So a lot of drink receptacles in the answers there, less so in terms of clothing and disposable barbecues, which is a really positive thing for us because the MPA did a campaign to stop the use of barbecues on the forest, so hopefully that was having some effect by the time the survey went out. So this question combines what you've mostly been collecting, as well as some extra answers that weren't really included on the previous list. So again, sort of plastic bottles, plastic wrappers, glass bottles comes up quite a lot, but also quite timely for this year, a lot of PPE was listed. So things like masks and gloves were also listed as things being picked up, and wet wipes, a lot of those as well. So yeah, a lot of unpleasant things being picked up as well, unfortunately. But yeah, thank you, all of you, for doing your part there. The next question was about the kit and the guidance and how you all found that. And the results are really good. A lot of you, the yellow there is very, so 63% of you selected very and 29% extremely, 8% moderately. And no one said slightly or not at all. So that's really positive in terms of how you found the guidance and how useful you found all of that. So again, any feedback, we welcome that. So thank you very much. This question was about the what part of the scheme, other than litter picking, have you been getting involved in? And as we can see, quite strong answers were verge parking and fly tipping. Again, quite timely for this year in particular. Those issues are becoming more and more of an issue in the forest, as well as issues around livestock and wild camping. So these are quite popular answers too. And the New Forest Code is coming up quite strongly. So thank you to everyone who has been helping share that information and those messages, and they are going to continue to be important over the coming year as well. The last question we're looking at is the online webinars and whether you would like them. So I imagine everyone here clicked yes please, because 70% of you did so, and again, thank you very much for your interest in this, and hopefully we'd like to run some more webinars after this evening. Okay, so final slide for me is about our contact information. Just a reminder that we've got our email address there for New Forest ambassadors, as well as our website and our report a problem page, which Nigel mentioned earlier. So I'll end this presentation now. Okay, and I'll hand back to Nigel.
Thanks ever so much, Richard, for your work behind the scenes and helping to put those kits together, sending things out, analysing them, really very much appreciated. I think we might just pause very briefly and looking at my colleague Jim to see whether there are any particular questions that have come up that we need to address now before we go into the second half of this webinar.
Yeah, yes, Nigel, not so much on the presentation yet, although people might be typing, but there was a question from Toby Wolf about, well, two items really, about messaging on bags, specifically dog poo bags, which I thought you might be able to answer from your litter group. And the second part of it is, he says that he's picked up receipts for junk food that had transaction IDs that could potentially be traced back to the person who dropped the litter. And I know that's also been thought about in terms of junk food packaging. He says that he's actually tried to get some interest from people on about that, but didn't have any luck. But I didn't know if you'd be able to share any thoughts from the litter group on those two items. So the messaging on bags and the tracing of litter.
So yeah, good questions, both of those, thanks. Yeah, so the reference to the litter group, so on a regular basis, the National Park Authority, the New Forest District Council, Forestry England and some other organisations as well in recent years. We've had National Trust, we've had the Verderers join with us, so basically we sit down on a regular basis and talk about litter. It's very exciting, and how we can encourage people not to drop litter in the first place, but then also how can we do something together about it once it has been dropped. litter or poo bags and messages on them. So originally we did actually produce some green bags with some messaging on, and I remember making sure that that you know, we were getting the right messages across. Now, what happened after that was that the New Forest District Council took on those bags, I think with the same design, and to the best of my knowledge that's still happening, but maybe that's something we can check up on outside obviously of this meeting and feed back out to you. Yes, when you find evidence of who exactly has dropped something, well, in the ideal world, that should get through to, I think it would be the New Forest District Council as the litter authority, who have people with enforcement powers who at least would be able to make a valued judgment as to whether the evidence that you have would be worth pursuing. So again, I can check up on that maybe outside of this meeting and feed that back out to you, but that would be my my initial reaction to that very good question. Jim, were there any other questions, or do we move on to?
Not right now, so I think, yeah, let's move on. But if anybody does have further questions, just pop them in and we can always come back to them.
Fine. So we're bang on time, which is good news. I have great pleasure in introducing you, if you've not met her already, to Lindsay Stride. Lindsay is a commoner. She's a mother. She's a local resident. She's a teacher. She's a great lady, and I'm sure you'll enjoy learning from her this evening. Lindsay, you may want to say lots more about yourself, but over to you.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to come along tonight. And a massive thank you to all the ambassadors for everything you've done over the summer. It really has made a big difference to the forest. I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of commoning. If there are any questions you would like to ask, please put them into the Q&A and I will try and answer as we go along. And if not, we can answer some questions at the end. Sam, if we can move on to the next slide. So if we click through these quickly, I'm a trustee of the Foundation for Common Land, which is a national charity. And quite often we think of ourselves as unique in the forest and very individual and very special, which we are. But we are part of a much larger family of common land. Sam, if you could click the stats up for me. Keep going, that's perfect. So common land is land owned by a person or organisation over which people, commoners, have legal rights, and mostly to graze livestock. My favourite right is up in Cumbria. They have poultry rights. We don't have those here. Another really interesting statistic to think about is that just 3% of England is common land. And yet, in that 3%, we have 39% of all open access land, 11% of all ancient monuments, 21% of all triple SIs, and 82% of commons are in national parks and AONBs. That is not a coincidence. Commoning is an ancient farming system, and it's an international farming system. There are commons all over the world, and interestingly, they often operate on the same principles and systems, because when you're working together and sharing something, it only works if people are reasonable and share fairly. Moving on, Sam. So we're going to flick through the next 2 or 3 slides. This is George Henry Penny, who is my husband's great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather actually, and we still farm on the same farm that he farmed on, which is amazing. So if we move to the next generation, this is Charlie Penny. Now, there's a lovely story. My granny was not from a traditional commoning family like my husband's. My granny was a romantic. She came down from London and she cycled all the way from London on her bike. And she slept in hay barns along the way, and people gave her a food and drink. And she fell in love with the New Forest. The journey she would have taken her through a landscape very similar to that we see today in the forest. Open heathland, villages and village greens where animals would graze, dairy cattle would go in and out. Today, the New Forest is that last stronghold, and with it, all the different flora and fauna that need that grazing. If we move on again, this is Ted Penny, who is one of Charlie Penny's children. He had 13 children and 3 sets of twins. Now, I know all about that because I have 1 set of twins, and I have the greatest respect for Charlie Penny and his wife. They were really kind to my granny, and they really helped her and my grandfather when they started commoning. And there's a lovely phrase, we had a Commoning Voices project, and the phrase that always comes to mind is that no one starts alone. So whilst commoning is the skills are passed down through the generations, it is a property right. It's something you have the right to do if you own or occupy land. So commoners are not always from traditional commoning families. Quite often commoners come from all different walks of life. We move on again. This is my husband's family, his mum and dad, Richard and Caroline Stride, and my husband Robert when he was much younger. Moving on again. Commoning today, if we move on again, Sam. We still have the same rights, although some of them are not in use today. So we have the right of pasture, which is to turn ponies and cattle out, the right of pasture for sheep. Now, that's quite an interesting right, and very few areas of a forest have the sheep right. We have the right of mast, which is the right to turn pigs out for the pannage season. On some of the commons, they have the right to turn pigs out all year round, and they don't operate under the pannage system as we do on the Crown Commons. The right of estovers is the right of fuel wood. Now, that tended to be for the grander, more smart houses in the forest. And Turberry was the poor man's fuel. So that was digging peat from the bogs, and they would dig them with a beautiful turving spade, which you can see one in the museum in Lyndhurst. It's like the spade on a pack of cards, that beautiful heart shape. They would dig a turf of peat and then walk 2 spaces and dig another, and they'd leave it out all summer to dry, and then in the autumn they'd go with their cart and bring that peat home. But that's a right that's been discontinued, along with marl, which is the right to dig clay for improving land and for building purposes. But for obvious reasons, those are discontinued now. Moving on, Sam. So I'm not going to talk a lot about verderers and agisters, as we could be here for hours and hours, but this is a lovely picture of the agisters from a long, long time ago. There are only 5 agisters in the whole world. It is the most incredible job and something that everyone should be very proud of. We are so lucky in the forest to have our systems. So I visit lots of other commons, and they don't have the structure and organisation that we do here. And we are blessed with that system to help us with our commoning. If we click, Sam, it should have a recording for us. Sometimes the recordings don't work. No luck.
That I just need to reshare it with the sound enabled. So give me 1 second.
Okay. So if I keep talking while Sam's doing that, the agisters are there to help us with our managing our animals, but it's our responsibility to look after our ponies. And we as commoners rely quite often on members of the public, on people like you. So if you're out and about in the forest and you ever see a pony or a donkey or a cow or a pig or a sheep that you have concerns about, please do call the verderers during working hours, or use the Forestry Commission number to report any animal. The agisters are on duty 24 hours a day. So there are ways to get through to them and tell them if there's a problem. If I had a pony that was injured or unwell, I would want to know about it. And the way that commoning works is that commoners are out in the forest all the time. We never walk past a pony and think, oh, that doesn't belong to me, I'm not going to have a look at it. We see every animal and we look carefully. And if we have a concern, we will always report it and do everything we can for that animal. And so a big thank you really to those of you who kind of cast an eye over the animals. We really appreciate it. Let's see if our sound will work.
Okay, I'm with Robert Mayton, who's one of the agisters in the forest. Robert, can you explain a little bit about how commoners work together to manage their animals?
Probably I find that commoners help each other mainly on our roundups that we have in the autumn. All the commoners come together on horses and on foot to make sure that we have a successful drifts and sort our ponies out.
So if we move on now. So if we flick through these slides, this is it's a spelling mistake there. This is Hubert Forward. You can see they're tail marking the ponies, which we still do today. Each agister has a tail cut, and that shows the area where the owner lives. Sometimes people think it's the area where the pony is, but it's actually the owner, to show that marking fees have been paid. Moving on again. So we start to look now a little bit at the seasons. So this little foal is one of ours. Her mum is called Vickers Saskia, and the foal is Cufnell's Clover. So you will discover in the next few minutes that I love flowers and plants on the forest. And so I name all of my ponies after forest flowers and forest plants. So we move on. There's one thing I really want you to kind of take note of, and that is so many of the plants and flowers that we see in the forest are tiny. And the reason they are tiny is because of all the big grazing mouths. Now, grazing means that the stronger, more dominant plants aren't able to outcompete the smaller, more fragile plants. So this is a very rare plant that we find in pools, and very often ephemeral pools that come and go. And this is a New Forest specialism only found in the New Forest, and it's one of the water crowfoots. So we move on once more. This is a nightjar. So our lives are dictated by the seasons, our animals, activities, and with those seasons comes the different changes of the wildlife. We are so lucky to have nightjars here. In that early summer period, we go to sleep with the nightjars wearing us to sleep. And it's the grazing of commoners' animals that creates those wonderful habitats for these incredible ground nesting birds. So all those messages about keeping your dogs on leads in the ground nesting bird season, they really matter, because our ground nesting birds are the jewels in our crown. Moving on. So sundew, I teach forest school and I take lots of children out into the forest, and this is one of those magical little plants that children adore. So it's an insectivorous plant. You find it at the edge of the bog and in the very wet heath. The sticky sundew pads, you'll often find flies there. And for small children, it's just a little bit of magic. It always makes me cross that children can name every dinosaur that walked the earth, but they cannot name our very precious New Forest plants and animals. Moving on. So after the foals are born in early spring, we turn the stallions out. Now, we are very proud of the fact that we have managed our ponies. We have reduced the number of stallions so that we're not overbreeding and that we are breeding really high quality ponies. And I am very proud to say the ponies that we have bred have competed at the very, very highest level in all disciplines. And so not only are our ponies doing a really important environmental job, but they're also really, really useful. They have wonderful lives when they leave the forest. And this pony is, this stallion is called Cameron Luck of the Irish, and he is Clover's father. So we move on. So as the summer goes on, we start to see the orchids appearing on the forest. And there are so many different orchids, but these are perhaps the most common orchids that you will see in the forest. They are a heath-spotted orchid, and I'm not very good at identifying all the plants on the forest, but if you're walking in the wet heath, we spot them very close to the edge of the bogs. There are carpets of them, and they are absolutely beautiful. And when I take people out on walks on the forest, they're always astounded. But again, it's that tiny, tiny little plants. You've got to really open your eyes to see them. Moving on. So I did some work with Jim, and we did a wonderful exhibition called the Commoning Voices exhibition. And in that process, I talked to a lot of commoners, and it really came across that there was a really big north-south divide in the forest, and that commoners in the north see themselves very differently to commoners in the south. And every year, COVID permitting, we've had a wonderful summer roundup. So a social event where all the commoners got together. And on this occasion, north versus south in the tug of war, we actually broke the rope. But it's a wonderful camaraderie within the commoning community, and we couldn't do what we do without one another. Moving on. All of these pictures and all of the clippings are available on the New Forest Knowledge website, which is an amazing place to go. If it's a cold and wet day, go and have a look. There is so much amazing information about the New Forest. But this is an old family friend of the Pennies. Behind her is their hayrick, and they used to thatch the hayrick after they'd gathered the hay in. So our summers are spent haymaking, and there's quite a lot of talk about all the lost hay meadows in the country. And actually, we're quite traditional in the way that we farm, and whilst there are some of our fields we cut early for silage, others we leave to flower. And we cut a little bit later, and we've got some beautiful hay meadows with orchids that grow through them and lots of other beautiful wildflowers. And that's something that we're very proud of, is actually sometimes being left behind brings you to the front, doesn't it, and changes the way things are. There's a lot of talk of regenerative agriculture now, and thinking perhaps that some of the old, more traditional ways of farming were better for the environment. We move on again. So this is another of my absolute favourites. This is huge compared to it in real life. It is absolutely tiny, and its common name is coral necklace. And these little plants grow where right now you walk and it's squelchy and muddy and it's just a rather average, boring forest track. But go back there in the summer, sort of June, July, and you will find a carpet of these absolutely exquisite plants. I'm told that they came here during the war, brought in on army tank tracks, and so they're quite rare, but a real little forest gem, and another one of those tiny specialities. Moving on. So in the summer, a lot of our time is spent out on the forest checking ponies, and my twins are 9 now, and we've spent most of this summer on our horses riding. Our cows run out. They tend to go to Brockenhurst. They always have done. It's a sort of 7 or 8 mile walk for them. They'll go there for the summer, and then we bring them home on the horses just before the acorns drop. So this year we brought them home early. My daughter and I were very proud that we caught the cows on our own. Something that many people don't realise is that commoners are out in the forest and can be catching their animals, driving their animals on any day of the year. People often think that only happens on the organised drifts, but as commoners we are out all the time moving ponies. Perhaps if there's a pony that's injured or a pony that's hurt, or like in the autumn when we want to bring them home before they start gorging on the acorns, we'll bring them home. Moving on. Another super species, silver-studded blue butterflies, another brilliant one for the kids. They have this incredible relationship with black ants. They are a really fussy creature. They like the heather to have been burnt 2 or 3 seasons before. They like it to have been lightly grazed. They lay their eggs near the black ant nests. The black ants take them underground, and they feed the caterpillar with this incredible little, with fresh heather leaves. The caterpillar in return gives this incredible sticky substance, which they absolutely love, really sweet. When the caterpillar comes out, the black ants protect them while they create their chrysalis and while they pupate. And then even when they climb up the heather to dry their wings, the ants are there protecting them. And in return, that next generation lays their eggs near the black ant nests. And they are like clouds when you walk through the heather. And again, they're a magical species to show children, to really excite them about the forest. Moving on, Sam. Wild gladioli. So the only place in Britain you will find wild gladioli is in the New Forest. They are not a tiny flower. They're quite unusual in the forest. They grow in the bracken, about maybe just over a foot high, and they equally rely upon sort of traditional management. So they don't like the bracken to be too thick. So commoners have cut bracken for bedding for generations, and straw has to be brought in on a lorry. And before the days of lorries, commoners had to find bedding from different places. It makes really good dung, really good for feeding the fields. And it's just another example of that symbiotic relationship between commoning and the flora and fauna of the forest. Moving on. Another of my favourites, this is a southern coenagrian, or the southern damselfly, and it also has a lovely little jewel of an activity. So it lays its eggs in the pools created at the edge of very gently moving streams, created by ponies. As they squelch in the mud, they create a tiny pool, and I've actually watched them laying their eggs in these little tiny pools, so the water isn't, the water is still. Another fussy creature, again, that benefits from grazing because it keeps its habitat nice and open. Moving on. So as we move into autumn, it's time to start thinking about the organised drifts. So pony drifting is where commoners go out in large groups and work as a team. They sort of circle the ponies and will drive them to the nearest pound. Colt hunting is where a commoner or 2 or 3 will go out and target an individual pony, usually a mare and foal. Now, those of you who know about horses will know that a young female is called a filly and a young male is called a colt. But in commoning circles, colts are all foals. So all foals are referred to as colts, whether they're male or female. And you can see here, this is a young commoner. He's got a rope halter around his pony's neck, and that's real tradition, but also a practical tool of the job. So if a pony is caught away from the pound, it might need a halter on, and it will be led back to the boxes or led home. Traditionally, they'd have ridden them home, and by the time they got home, they were halter broken. And this is a lovely forest pony. There's nothing better than a forest pony for colt hunting because they know their job. Moving on. So this is a lovely picture. I've tried to put pictures in from the past and the present. So this is from the sort of early 1990s, and this is out at Durr Hill. So you can see lots of seedling pine out there, which has been cleared in recent years. The heathlands are really, really precious habitats and quite rare on a sort of international level. So you can see the riders riding and driving the ponies forward. Now, quite often people are surprised by the amount of noise that commoners make. So they'll very often shout and we call it hollering. So each commoner has their own sound that they make. And that's really to make the ponies think that there are 50 riders and they really shouldn't bother to escape. Moving on. So Beaulieu Road pony sales are a really important part of forest life. They're held usually once a month through the autumn, and commoners are able to sell their ponies. I've sold several ponies through Beaulieu Road who have gone on to incredible success. One pony was very highly placed at Horse of the Year show. Other ponies have gone on to do brilliant things in dressage. We're amazing at breeding ponies, but there are people beyond the forest who take forest foals and produce them into the most fantastic riding ponies. Moving on. I think we've got some sound with this one. No, don't worry. Moving on. Oh, yes.
Very quickly, 705, 75, 80, 85, 90, and 98. Anybody else coming? And 95, resting, 100, 100 guineas, and 100, and 5, 10.
Commoners are always pleased when it goes over 100 guineas. And a guinea is £1 and 5p. A pound to the seller and 5p to the auctioneer. And all ponies across the country are sold in guineas. Moving on, Sam. So another really exciting one to show children. And this year is a good year for this fungi. So it's very, very rare, only found on New Forest pony poo. And until this year, really only found in the New Forest. But a few New Forest ponies conservation grazing projects in other parts of the country, and they have taken with them this wonderful fungi called Peronia punctata. Again, really good fun, found on New Forest pony poo, a great one for the kids. Moving on. So panage season. If I post on Twitter or Instagram a picture of a pig, I will get hundreds of likes. Everyone loves to see the pigs in the forest. And again, it's one of those things that people would have seen up and down the south coast or across all the heathlands. People would have kept a pig and they'd have turned them out in the autumn to feed on the acorns. In other parts of the world, it's really, really highly prized. Iberico ham is made from acorn-fed pork. But here in the forest, slowly people are coming to realise just how special our panage pork is. It's a really important part of our commoning system. The pigs help to look after our ponies by feasting on the acorns, and many of you will know that this is a mast year, so some of the oak trees have produced really, really big acorns, and they've been dropping quite early this year. They started dropping in August and have kept dropping, and they're still dropping now. Moving on. So we'll just flick through these. These are some incredible fungi. So the New Forest is one of the few places that is identified as a SSSI for its fungi. And if you go out on a walk today, as I did at Forest School, you will see hundreds. The children, I set them the task of identifying which tree hosts the most fungi. And the children were counting, and they were into the hundreds by the time we got back to school. Moving on. This is home for me. This is Pilmore Gate Heath, and I walk past this tree every day when I walk my children to school, and it's a really special place. And I think for those of you that know and love the forest, sometimes walking the same path every day is really, really important, and you see those really slow, subtle changes. So you can see here the Valley Mire. I love to watch the bog asphodels starting to come through and then bursting into flower and then going over and then gone. It's part of that bit that grounds us and makes us feel connected to nature. Moving on. So here is a picture of us baling bracken. So this is on a wild gladioli site. And the bracken is, as I said before, a really important product for us. We use it for bedding our cattle down. But it's really nice to be able to continue those traditions that our grandparents did before us. Moving on. And a lot of people are surprised when we say our cows start to calve now. So in the next week, our cows will start to have their babies. We calve now because this is when our cows are at home. In the summer, our cows are out in the forest and we can't keep a close eye on them. At this time of year, the cows are home because of the acorns, so it makes sense to calve now. And then the cows can be in through the winter time. Ours come in during the day and they have hay and silage. And then in the night time, we let them out to the forest. And there's a lovely phrase in the forest. They say that the forest is God's barn. So our cows are beautifully clean, they're warm, and they're happy because they can go out, they can browse the heather, they can browse and wander, stretch their legs, and then they're back at the gate at 6 o'clock in the morning waiting to come in again. Moving on. And there's a little video here that my children made. So I think there are lots of people don't really understand how much of a family activity commoning is. Our children help get the cows in before school. They feed their ponies on the way to school. They ride their ponies out in the evenings, and they are a really important part of our commoning family and our lives. And they're getting to an age now where they're starting to be useful. Move on. I love this picture. This is in the sort of the early 1930s, and this is on the family farm. And commoners used to keep dairy cattle, and their dairy cows would go in and out, and the pennies had the penny dairy, and they provided all the milk for sort of this side of Lyndhurst. And if you move on to the next picture, you can see that same barn is still standing, and we're still farming in that same yard. This is where we were TB testing. So the New Forest has a special TB plan. So all cattle are TB tested within 3 months over the winter period. The adjutor will come round and mark the cattle. Each cow has a unique ear tag with the Verderers mark on and a Verderers number, as well as their unique marks. You'll often see they'll have yellow tags and silver tags, lots of tags for identification purposes. And when you buy your meat, you'll very often see that that ear tag number is on the packet as well. So we've got good traceability. It's really important to have good cattle handling systems on for holdings. And you'll often notice that at every gateway in the forest, commoners will also have a wooden pound. Moving on. This is another one. And if you listen to Robert, he'll talk a little bit about the stallions.
Robert, can you tell me a little bit about this pony?
Yeah, this is actually a foal that's bred by my son. He's a young commoner. He has his own prefix, which is Woodfidley, close to where we live in Bewley. This particular foal is by Mallard's Wood Law and Order, which has been bred on the Verderers bloodline scheme. The bloodline scheme is all about widening the gene pool, as we had over 100 stallions running the forest a few years ago, and we've now reduced it down to 15 going out in any 1 year. And that has been a really good idea, but unfortunately it's brought with it that we've narrowed the gene pool. So now we're trying to produce ponies which are again going to widen it for years to come.
So this picture is again from sort of early 1990s, when there were that 100 stallions running out on the forest, and this is the passing. So the passing happens in the springtime, and the Verderers select which stallions go out on the forest, and those stallions only run out for 6 weeks to ensure that we don't have early foals, we don't have late foals, and we only have a small number of foals. We move on.
Robert.
And final slide. So that foal we saw at the beginning, Cufnall's Clover, well, this is her as a yearling this summer, and she has grown into the most beautiful New Forest pony. And we're very proud of her. One of the problems of reducing the stallion numbers is that as commoners, we don't get very many foals. So when a filly comes along, a little girl, we've kept these lovely fillies. She's got a sister as well, the same age. And they run here close to the farm, so we see them all the time. And the children, when they ride out, will come home and say, "Oh, Mum, we've spotted Clover or we've spotted Campion." And hopefully we'll see them for years and years to come. As a commoner, when you brand a pony, you brand that pony for life. And that's your mark to say, "I will keep you and I will look after you, and you'll live your free life out in the forest." Our ponies live a wonderful natural life, and as a result, they're very healthy. And I've had lots of interesting conversations recently with equine organisations and specialists who are now really interested in learning from the way ponies are kept in the New Forest. So a massive thank you to you and the efforts that you've put into helping keep the New Forest special this summer. I hope you will continue. We will continue to be grateful to you. And common land is shared land. We all share it. We all have a responsibility for it. And we are so blessed to live here in the forest. So thank you very much.
Wow. Lindsay, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic, inspiring, fascinating. And I'm sure everybody will agree that the New Forest is such a wonderful place. I'm always intrigued to hear those wonderful stories about how interconnected everything is, and how very, very often you find that commoning and the grazing of the forest is at the sort of very foundation, at the root of why the forest is such a rich place for wildlife. I'm aware also. So I'm looking at the chats. There was one specific question about fly tipping and the use of cameras, and just to reassure some of you, the Forestry England guys do use cameras and had quite good success in recent years about catching some fly tippers. They work very closely with the police and the district council on that, and they're quite familiar with covert cameras and things like that. So hopefully that's reassured you that use of technology these days is very much to the fore. But I do want to, as we round up this evening, just to come back to the fact that, you know, as Lindsay says, we have a joint responsibility for this wonderful place. Some of us have a phrase that's called Team New Forest. And it strikes me that this evening I'm grateful for the joint efforts of those who've helped with presenting and managing this evening's presentation, but also again a thanks to all of those of you out there. I can't see any of you. I know you're there, and we're very grateful for the part that you play in the big Team New Forest as we care for this wonderful place. I'm going to glance back to Jim to see if I've missed anything in particular of the chat that's happened.
No, just to say that if people have ideas, they can always email us at any time on the ambassadors@newforestenpa.gov.uk, and Richard will pick those up. So thanks, everybody. Brilliant. So thank you once again, everybody. I'm going to let you go back to your families and have your evening cup of whatever it is. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thank you to everybody for their help in presenting. Well done.